Education. Thanks for remembering all of us. Sincerely, Sarah Lale and family. So let's certainly remember the Lale family in our thoughts and prayers going forward, and just reminisce and be thankful that he served this board, I want to say, in excess of 20 years on the Board of Education.
Deborah would know, yes.
But,
about 23.
Yeah, so. And Miss Ryan, she was going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, but she would have to do it from Normandy, France today. So that's a student exchange trip. She hosted a child from Normandy, I believe. Two students. And so now they've returned. They'll stay at their house. So if Matt Cooksey would lead us in our pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, fellow board members, you have the agenda, and there is one item. Could I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. New business, planning for transportation cost decrease. And I'll recognize Mr. John McCurdy, Director of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members, Dr. Hefner. Tonight we're here to talk about consolidating routes for the middle schools and the elementary schools. We presented this a week or so ago, so we're here tonight to discuss and any questions need to be answered. Willing to try to do that.
Chairman Odom, would you like for Dr. Curry to go over the feedback, the consolidated feedback that was received? And we did have 100% of the schools to submit that parent feedback from their advisory boards.
That would be good.
Okay?
John, I may have to call you right back up here. We have lots of questions. But good evening, Chairman Odom, members of the board, Dr. Hefner. I appreciate the opportunity to share the feedback that we have had from all of our elementary schools and middle schools. And you have a copy of this feedback in your folders, and you also have the individual school feedback. And what we've done is we have summarized and we have coded and thematically centered the concerns and the positives and the questions and suggestions from all 9 of the schools participating. Of course, the high school did not, because they don't have children necessarily impacted on this. This is our transportation budget, which is also in your file. We added this a little bit earlier today, but you can see what the transportation budget has been supplemented with from the local and what is actually given from the state. Next slide, please. In order of frequency, what I did was I categorized and coded, and anything that related to the behavior of students, we coded a certain way, and that was what was most frequently brought up. Behavior is a major concern at all schools, especially when it comes to having middle school students riding the same bus as elementary students. The second highest concern was that time is a concern in relation to perceived longer bus routes, because we haven't established that. We think that they might actually be shorter bus routes, but perceived longer bus routes, later dismissal, and earlier or later start times for children. This had much to do with personal concerns such as getting to work on time, how this might impact the home life with family involvement in church and athletics. 5 of the 9 schools expressed concern with a lack of time to respond, in which they had known earlier that this was a consideration. Safety concerns due to overcrowding, a potential need to evacuate, a potential bus accident, and inclement weather dismissal. I think that sometimes the public isn't really aware, but when we evacuate a bus site, we never use the buses on site as it is, just because of the potential that maybe the buses have been tampered with in some way. Okay? Bus parking is also a concern at both middle schools, especially during special events and athletic events. And I know that you're all aware how crowded it gets to park at these middle schools if you've been there during these events, so I think that's also a very valid concern from the middle schools. The express positives from the schools were cost savings. Some of our parents felt that it would be beneficial to have siblings home at the same time, and I'm guessing that's because an older sibling might be able to help supervise a younger sibling. The efficiency in the routes, why have 2 buses go to the same stop? Older siblings can watch out for younger siblings, and this was in relation to on the bus. Less expense for fuel, more parking at the elementary schools, and more consistency in bus drivers, because this would take away some of the need for bus drivers, which were having difficulty filling those positions. These were some of the suggestions that were presented. We would need consistency and quality of drivers. That would be beneficial. One of the things that came up quite frequently, and I believe it may have been at all schools, but you have those documents in your folder, is we should consider hiring a monitor to offset safety concerns if we move forward. Consolidate middle and high school bus routes instead. And I think that was actually looked at, and we'll allow John to address that one. We should seek feedback to see how long it is, how it is going to be if we move forward. And I think 3 or 4 weeks into it, selecting feedback and see how things are going from folks if we decide to do this. Put quality cameras on all buses. There were complaints that some buses do not have cameras. I know that we have a plan to do that, but we would need to communicate that very clearly. Make current bus routes more efficient was a suggestion. Stricter rules on buses and consequences enforced. Parents would like to see the bus routes early before they actually get handed them on the first day of school or at open house. Look at fleet busing. I'm not exactly sure what that meant, and I don't know if that means like a company, but that's what it said on there. And we want transparency and current efficiency analysis. And I'm assuming that's what we look at with Tim's, and we've decided that we're not really running things as efficiently as we could be, and this might be a move towards efficiency.
Dr. Curry, I think you skipped number 5.
Okay. Number 5, need assurance that the ride time is not longer. Some of the questions that we had, and I think some of these are really interesting and good questions considered. Have we considered pairing high school and middle school? And we'll let Mr. McCurdy address that. Is there a detailed description of cost savings? How will the money be saved? How will the money saved be used? And I think that many of these are probably things that we can answer this evening. How will we fund cameras on all buses? When was this first proposed? Will the length of time students are on the bus be increased? Can older siblings sit with younger siblings if we move forward? How will the children getting dropped off earlier, I'm guessing that's at the schools in the morning, be supervised? Can we pay monitors? Who will lose their job, and can a responsible 8th grade student help to monitor? And some of those are a little difficult to answer because when you ask if all the routes will be shorter, they might be shorter for 60% of the children, but it might be longer if somebody lives 3 miles from the school. It might be a little bit longer than it was the year before. So I don't know that we can guarantee that, but overall I think that we could probably guarantee that they're likely to be shorter. Do you have any questions about the feedback that we received?
Did you have any calls from parents of children who had elementary students?
No, I did not have one call. I don't believe, since I handle all parent complaints, I think because we gave an avenue for expression and we sought feedback, that might have eliminated the need for some of those phone calls, but complaint calls typically go to my office first.
Okay.
If you could address, just for clarification, the pairing of high school and middle school as opposed to the middle elementary.
At this point, I would like for Mr. McCurdy, he received the questions, and I think that he has worked on some responses
Okay.
today. So, John, would you go ahead and take over at this point? Thank you.
On that question, the parent of the high school, due to the distance, especially between West Middle School and the high school, it would require significant build time variance. And our real big savings is really on our outlying elementary schools. Those students live to the furthest part of the county. bringing those in is where we'll gain most of our savings. And I've got some statistics on some average students per bus. I've got a copy of that, and I believe I give you a copy of it also, where you can see on some of these buses, like for the high school, for instance, we done a 2-week run in February, and for all the high school buses, a daily average in the AM was only 24 students per bus. So you can see on a 66 or 72 passenger bus, which normally a high school would be like a 40 passenger for a 66 is all they can haul. But we're way down on those numbers, just to talk about the high school. But your elementaries are also the same. And the reason being is because we have to go out so far and you might drive 2 miles before you pick up another student. So to get the kids back at the time for school to take up, we only have so much time, you can't pick up so many being that far apart.
Right.
So we're looking at some of them being 26, 24.5, so that's where our big savings will be, is picking up those middle and elementary at the same time.
So on the low end of those numbers of buses coming back with low numbers, your lower numbers are in the 20s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Curry's making all of you a copy of what John had put at my seat, but it actually shows the average for each of the buses.
Yeah, on the far right of that, when you get that, that's where it'll show per bus. Like for Ellendale Elementary School, on bus 154, in the AM, the average for the 2 weeks was 28. And then the PM, it was 29. Because, you know, that changes a lot with sports, about even how many rides from all.
And the maximum capacity on those buses would be
Well,
what, 60 or 72?
All of our buses is between 66 and 72 for the K through 5. And we got a very, you know, some of all. That's the small passenger size we have is a 66.
So those buses are right now running at 1/3 to 1/2
Some of
capacity
them
base.
at 1/3.
And I am assuming, John, that we're continuing to do that to keep those ride times as low as possible?
Right. Correct.
Tell me when to stop.
Okay, that's good.
Any other questions of Mr. McCurdy?
As far as the parking at East and West, what's been, I mean, has that been evaluated? Because I know being at West for a lot of events, you know, it's already an issue. So could you clarify a game plan for that?
Well, during events, that will be a problem. But as far as a place for buses now, we have room at East and West to hold all the buses. But during the events, if those areas are not blocked off to where parents of events cannot park in there, then that will be a problem. And I mean, it is now with the few amount of buses we have.
Do you contemplate having to spend monies to create a new parking area at either school?
I don't know if there's that much room at West. There could be some additional parking up there. But at East, also, there could be some additional parking with some trees removed. That could be a possibility to help relieve some of that overcrowding.
And then another question that I wonder about is, explain to us the responsibility of how, you know, I know typically a school handles their buses as far as keeping drivers on those buses. And I know that there's a plan, but could you just tell us what that plan is about how that bus is staffed as far as the driver? Is it all going to fall to the middle schools, or is it going to be spread between the middle and the elementaries?
I believe it will be spread between the elementaries because it would be too much on a middle school to handle that many buses. I mean, I think a certain group of buses, say four buses could be assigned to Ellendale. They could be in charge of those buses and vice versa.
So one outcome could be that instead of the middle schools having more responsibility, they actually will probably have less.
Somewhat.
Because if you take that and take less buses and divide it equally between those schools, then their share could be less.
Somewhat, yes.
John, would you like to go through the other questions? I know that you have submitted some answers. The only one that you've really talked about was the possibility of pairing middle and high school.
Okay. On number 2, on the cost savings, the original presentation where we had done earlier, that's all we still have to go on as far as per bus savings. And the chief consultant in DPI, we talked to him and he couldn't really give us an exact figure per bus, how much it would save. But on the cost we look at per student, that we talked about, of $720 per student, and parking that many buses times, that's how we came up with. I'd say a realistic figure is more like 160 to 200,000 that we would probably save by parking 8 buses, if we can park 8 buses. Of course, until all this is put together, it might come up we can't park the 7 or maybe even 6, until we put all the numbers in. How will the money saved be used? I guess that'll be up to the chief financial officer and administration where that money will be used.
It's called keeping your doors open.
Or not doing a riff with staff.
Right.
That's exactly how it would be used.
And on the cameras, we're working on and planning now to get cameras on all the buses. I think we like about 14 buses have everything equipped, where there is some old cameras that will need to be replaced. And Ms. Mahaffey had informed me that we can possibly use some of the half-cent sales tax, plus some of the savings on parking this many buses, that could be used to get everything with good cameras on it. When this first was proposed, actually it was probably really before December that we started talking about, maybe in September, I believe, that we had started this discussion.
I think we actually started this discussion in October.
October, okay. On that.
And what that discussion was for you to do research in other systems to see how they consolidated bus routes and get the information that you were able to get hold of.
And the length of time students will be on the bus will be increased. There will be some of the elementary students, like I said, the far out students that probably will have to ride a little longer. And then there'll be some that will ride shorter. So as Ms. Curry, talked about, there will be some longer and some less. The older siblings and young siblings move forward. That will kind of be up to the principal's decision at the school whether that can happen.
I think some of the comments I had seen, the question was some parents were thinking that we would segregate the bus. That you'd have, is that the plan? Because I was not clear on that. Is it true that we would put middle school in one section and elementary in another? And so that's what that question was sort of referencing, I believe.
That really has not been discussed.
No, and the concerns or the suggestions from the community were, will they be separated? Some people wanted them separated. Some people wanted middle school students up front so that we could keep a closer eye on them. Other people wanted middle school students sitting with their siblings, their younger siblings, because if, an 7th grader sitting with his 3rd grade sibling, then the parent can be reasonably assured that that 7th grader is going to protect that child. So all the suggestions that came in were very varied, and it just became abundantly clear to me that it's going to have to be probably, like John said, a principal decision for what's for the safety of those children, and perhaps utilizing some type of bus monitor safety patrol type system.
Okay. Any other board members have any questions or comments for Mr. McCurdy?
Sorry, I was going to still stay in the list a little bit. They're asking about, parents asked about monitors. Is that part of is that something that they were bringing up and that it's not really part of our plan right now? Is that where that question came from?
Mr. Cooksey, we haven't gotten that far into it yet. This was just initial conversations as far as whether to move forward. That certainly would be part of the conversation. But in all honesty, for cost savings and to save jobs and not to have to do a reduction in force, I'm not looking at hiring additional bus monitors. I would be looking to use staff that we already have hired as those monitors.
And just to clarify, I just want to make sure I understand that the savings that would incur, would that not be best back in general fund because we could use half-cent sales tax, which are earmarked for capital needs as such? for the, I mean, we wouldn't want to use those savings for cameras, would we?
I think that as good as County Manager French and the commissioners have been, Mr. Shrum, in all honesty, anything that, a request, in order to use half-cent sales tax, we have to have permission to
Right,
do that.
I understand that.
So when we're going to have an expenditure, we always request permission and the amount of money that we would use from that particular funding source. They have never questioned or denied anything that we have asked. We have asked for safety equipment. We have asked to put up fencing and different things. And so I think the best thing to do would be to use that half-cent sales tax money to buy the cameras that would go on the buses.
Because it can't go in those monies can't go in the general funds, but our savings can stay in general funds.
Correct. And so like half-cent sales tax could never be used to hire bus monitors. That money cannot be used for anything except capital projects.
Yeah. And to clarify also that when we say we're asking for permission for those half-cent sales tax, those monies that are set aside for us, that's not money, additional monies we're asking for. Those are set aside for us, but they still have control over what we can use them for.
Correct. But again, I'll say that they've been really good. Anything that we've asked to use that money for, this is another example. Technology leases for the one-to-one, every child grades 3 through 12, they have a computer. Those technology leases are funded through half-cent sales tax.
I'm just new and learning about the budget and everything. Every time I walk in this building, I'm learning so much about the wonderful teachers that we have, and I don't want us to lose any school personnel, period, if possible, and I'm sure that that's one of our big goals. We
Ms.
need
Sellers, that has
everybody.
been the goal of this board since we started talking about these budget issues. That was the very last thing that we ever wanted to do. Because when you talk about hurting Alexander County, it does not help Alexander County to have people out of work. And so that was a last resort, and we talked about possibly closing a school to capture savings. Now we're talking about consolidating bus routes. The next thing to go to will be a reduction in force with staff. And again, that is the thing that I as superintendent and this board have tried our best to avoid. In 2014, Chairman Odom, how many teacher assistants were laid off throughout the state?
8,000.
8,000 teacher assistants were laid off throughout the state because of funding cuts in 2014. We did not do any of that. We dipped into fund balance to balance the budget to keep our teacher assistants employed. So I'm going on record as saying I've never wanted to do that. I don't want to do it now. But that is the third option.
Any other questions of Mr. McCurdy, the board? Okay. I would like to make a comment. First of all, I want to thank Mr. McCurdy and D. Watts. It's not like they were just sitting over at the bus barn one day and said, hey, let's do a study about how to reduce the number of buses in Alexander County schools. That was far from it. Anybody that pays attention to Alexander County schools knows full well that since the Great Recession of 2008, that we have struggled with funding. And we, you know, people they only live in the present. They don't remember the past. But we have not had a mass layoff at the Alexander County school system in the history of the school system. When all the other systems were, you hear it on the news, closing schools. We've not closed a school. Unless you want to get back to Glade Creek and go to some of these small community one-room schoolhouses, but there was a new school that took its place. A few years ago, there was a Save Our School, Save Our School. No school closed. And we were needing to save $350,000 a year doing that. So we didn't do it. We bit the bullet and we spent more of our emergency savings, fund balance, call it whatever you want to. It's money in the bank to operate your school system. Now, one thing that really concerns me is that, you know, we want to be open and we want to be transparent in all our dealings. We had public hearings regarding potential resolution of intent to close the school. Had several public hearings. Had a great turnout. After that, then we don't have much of a turnout at all for much of anything. And I base it on, you know, you can look at the school board meetings on YouTube now, after the fact. Well, I just wanted to share some interesting stats about apathy for you tonight. At our February 12th meeting, we got 55 views. February 19th, we got 103 views. March 12th, we had 67 views. April the 9th, we had 38 views. I continued to look on YouTube, and there was a yard sale in Taylorsville on a Tuesday in 1997, and it had 192 views. You know, we've got almost 5,000 children in our school system, and we all want the best for our children. But there's several things that a school board cannot do, and most folks, they're oblivious to this. It's like you're speaking Greek to them. A school system cannot raise operating revenues. That means we can't tax. That means we're dependent on the state of North Carolina, the federal government, and the Alexander County Commissioners for our funding. School systems can't borrow money. If we want somebody to issue debt, we have to ask the Alexander County Commissioners to issue that debt. The auditorium, every school expansion that you've seen from Stony Point, Ellendale, Wittenberg, Sugarloaf, all these additions and renovations, they weren't paid for by the Alexander County Board of Education. They were authorized to occur. The contracts were approved, but at the end of the day, the county, Alexander County, paid those bills. They paid those debts off. So we can't borrow money, and we can't tax people. Now, regarding the busing cost, you mind to go back to that slide? Because I wish the press was here, but you know, I guess maybe there'll be one of the 55 views on YouTube we might get. If you look at 2014, 2015, we had to subsidize with local money almost $50,000 to balance the expenditures for transportation. And I might add that public school transportation is not a right, it's a privilege, so some folks may get that confused. Fast forward to 2017, 2018, we're nearing $200,000, well, $186,000, that we had to supplement with local money to make that transportation budget work. 2018, 2019, there's $242,000. And you'd say, well, why is that? Why is that? Well, I spent about 2 decades of my life as a mechanic, and Scott Bowman does it for a living. And I'm sure anybody that drives a vehicle today, when you have a breakdown, you spend far more to repair that vehicle than you would have 30 years ago. There's far more technology on a school bus in 2019 than there was in 1987 when I drove a bus as a high school student. So the costs have continued to go up to insure buses, to repair buses, and I can assure you that the staffing at the bus barn has not grown. Mr. McCurdy has worked for our school system for decades, started as a mechanic. And I bet he could tell me, and this is kind of catching him cold, but I bet when he first started at the bus barn, they had more employees than they have today.
One more.
One more. And how many years ago was that?
30 years ago.
Okay, so we have less employees at the bus barn today than we have had 30 years ago. So that's just one piece. That's the transportation budget. Now, the elephant in the room, or giraffe, whatever you want to call it, is that we have struggled and used our savings to keep people employed. We were informed, just like every other school system in the state of North Carolina and every other town in the state of North Carolina and all 100 counties in the state of North Carolina, that the contribution rate for teachers and state employees retirement system, right now, the contribution rate in the state of North Carolina for teachers, the Alexander County school system contributes 18.86% of the covered payroll. And that was effective July 1, 2018. Now you all know what 18.86% is of a $100 bill. All right, we'll just translate that to millions of dollars. In the next 3 years, the contribution requirement for local governments to the retirement system is going to go up, in rough math, almost 6%. So you add 6% to almost 19%, and that's a lot of money. And that's not even including increases for health insurance costs. Now, if you're a state employee and you think, oh my goodness, they're going to put almost 6% more into my retirement. Let me tell you, friend, that's not going to change what you get in retirement. They're just trying to strengthen.
Trying to balance your retirement budget.
Yeah, they're trying to balance their retirement budget. So that in itself is over $500,000. And that cow is going to come home this summer for Alexander County Schools. In similar proportion, it's going to come home for Alexander County government, which is across the street, and at a much lesser rate, because we only have 21 employees at the town of Taylorsville. That percentage impact it's the same percentage. So that is why one reason why we asked the transportation department to see where we could save some money, because we're at a point where we have to cut our overhead costs. Now, we talk about federal funding and we talk about state funding. I want to focus on local funding. How do we spend the local appropriation that we get from the commissioners? And I might add that they have increased our funding the last few years, albeit we have not received everything we requested, but they have made a valid attempt. This is how the local appropriation is used. Supplements. What are supplements? Supplements are paid to the employees of a school system. It's an employee retention tool is what it is. And they spend $1,774,813 on local supplements. That's a chunk of money. But it's no different than in other counties. Some counties pay more in local supplement. Other counties pay less. But that is a big chunk of money, local money. Utilities for all the buildings, $983,000. Personnel for maintenance and repair of parts, some classroom teachers, central office administrators, clerical support, technology supplies, materials, salaries, supplement the school nutrition program that for several years ran in the red, so that meant we had to take local money to make that balance. Charter schools, local per pupil appropriation for each child. challenge early college. Security monitoring. You know, that's one thing that's really important, security monitoring. When I went to Alexander Central, I think we had quite a few more students than exist today, and we had 2 part-time security officers. And what I mean is we had one officer, and it was a part-time gig. So now we have 3 resource officers between the high school and Student Success Center and the early college, so there's a cost there as well. Band and chorus supplements, local support for transportation. Yeah, we just saw those numbers. Athletic supplements and supplies, including salary for athletic trainer. We're required by state law, if we're going to play sports, we have to have a full-time trainer on site. That didn't exist in 1989.
And it didn't come with any funding.
Yeah, so that's all local money. Professional development, resource officers, North Carolina virtual public school courses, insurance, liability, vehicle, property, etc. I don't know about you, but my property insurance and car insurance has gone up quite a bit in the last few years. Instructional support, counselors, social workers, nurses, media coordinators. Additional instruction funds for the schools, digital resources, and instructional subscriptions. Solid waste removal. See, we pay per ton when we dump. A school system has to pay the scale fee just like anybody else at the landfill. And also custodial supplies. Now this is just about North Carolina, and at the end of the day, it's not going to change the way people think, because tough decisions are never popular decisions. They're never easy decisions. But, and this has been in the news, and I don't know if anybody paid any attention to it, but allegedly that a lot of the school boards are bureaucrats similar to communists. That's been stated by one of our local state senators. So, but what really concerns me is that when we went to school, we didn't have computers. Now with the one-to-one initiative, most of our children have a laptop provided by the school system. Now there is an annual service fee to use that, but I dare say you couldn't go to Best Buy and buy that computer for that annual service fee. But in North Carolina and per pupil spending, in 2017 we ranked 39th. Well, there's only 50 states that I'm aware of. But since the Great Recession, in North Carolina alone, 8,000 teacher assistant jobs eliminated. Textbooks dropped from a high of $88.15, $88.15, to $47.86. Voucher funding increases, and vouchers, that just lets folks go somewhere else to school. You know, they operate under a different set of rules. 145 million. 2018-2019 budget adjustments added an additional 10 million to opportunity scholarships and 3 million to education savings accounts. Now we don't have access to that. The newest budget adjustments include planning cuts in the amounts of 4 million from the central office budget, and that's statewide, and 5 million from DPI's budget. Now it does talk about that 2018-2019 budget adjustments also set the beginning teacher salary at $3,500 per month and increases by $100 a month for each year of service until year 15. In years 15 through 24, teachers earn a base salary of $5,000 per month, and the salary schedule frozen there until 25 plus years, when the monthly salary would increase by $200. if you go back to the recession, you gotta go all the way back to 2008. Our funding level, when you factor in CPI, which is inflation, we're still playing catch-up as a state. And if we're 39th, you know, that's, if that was a NASCAR race and you had 50 cars, you wouldn't get any TV time, and you probably wouldn't sell a lot of T-shirts either. But, you know, we have a budget situation. We can't generate revenues as a school board. We couldn't go see Milton at Community One Bank, First Community, and borrow money. We just can't do it. We can't do it. We have millions of dollars sitting in school capital that we could use for sticks and bricks and heat pumps. The problem is we can't spend that money to pay teachers or teachers' aides or balance our budget shortfall in the transportation line item. So we're sitting on an opportunity where we could fix our schools, build what needs to be built, but why do you add square footage when you have less students? That's kind of counterintuitive. I say all that for the benefit of our two newest board members. I thought that they deserved just a history of where we've been, because this is not the first tough issue that we have faced. But our fund balance cannot go below $2 million. And this is the reason. School teachers only get paid for 10 months, but they spread their check out over 12. Well, you've got to be able to meet your payroll in the summertime. And we've got a pretty big payroll. And you've got to pay your light bill and all those other things. But we've leaned on the county commissioners very hard for several years. And but there comes a time when the state of North Carolina has to get their funding for public education back to pre-recession levels. And that's the long and short of it. And I'd be more than happy to, the problem is we only get 55 views on YouTube. So whether if you're consolidating buses, you know, I appreciate the people that came out tonight and have an earnest and valid concern. I appreciate you coming out. But, you know, we've got 5,000 children, and we have to run school for everybody. And somebody in our school system, or something, or some activity, or some budget, we have to come up with about $500,000 in savings just to address the additional costs that we're going to pay in to the state retirement system. We don't have an option. It's state law. Dale Falwell, who's the state treasurer, it's going to happen to every school system. So it's not unique. But and now on a personal note, and then I'll hush, but I'll let everybody else, I ask them if they had any questions or comments first. A long, long time ago, in 1976, 77, there was a first grade boy, and he rode bus number 37. And he rode the bus with, if you can believe it or not, a lot of ninth graders. And so I went through there and I looked at all the ninth graders and eighth graders and seventh graders that I rode with. Now, I was just a first grader, you know, and it was said to me that children are different today. And I got to thinking, I don't know if I agree with that, because some of the folks that I rode with on this bus, yeah, some eventually made it to prison, but some also, some were very successful, you know. So, you know, it's not, if we said this was a new concept, then that would be a misstatement. I rode bus number 37, Donnie Jones, Clara Smith, Helen Gant, some of the finest people in the world. When they looked in that mirror, you know, if something was going on, now I understand that, and by the way, Miss Sutig paddled me twice in first grade, so that should.
That was just a start. Though.
Just a start. But I honestly think that our children, all our children, I honestly think that they do have a nurturing spirit. And yes, we do have issues that we face today because nobody knew what ADHD was in 76, 77. But I trust because I have faith in our children that I don't see it as I see it as though our kids still have a nurturing spirit. You know, if somebody's bullying somebody, I'm sure they'll call them out or bring attention to the driver. In 1976 and 77, I didn't have a smartphone, but nobody else did either. You know, all our phones were tied to the wall. But, you know, this is a budget. It's not a crisis, but I can promise you that if we don't cut costs, we will have one in less than 24 months. Unless manna falls from the heavens and a lot more money starts coming in, which I don't see that. I honestly don't see that happening, but, you know, we're gonna have to, as a board, we're gonna have to look at cost cutting and money saving. It may not be, this issue may not be the ball that gets things rolling, but we're charged with having a balanced budget. That means we can't deficit spend as a school board. So our budget will have to balance. And the only way to, if you've overspent your budget, you have to appropriate from fund balance. You have to pull from savings. Well, you know, when you don't have any more savings, you can't balance your budget, and that's a statutory violation. And so we won't get to that point between now and January, and that will end my tenure as board chair in January. But the last thing I want is to end my service on this school board in 3 years with a school system that's broke. So we either have to raise revenues, which means we have to ask the commissioners for more. We have to lobby the state of North Carolina to bring us back to pre-recession levels, or we have to cut spending. So, any other board member like to say anything?
To expand more, just for general knowledge, when you talk about what our teacher pay scales are moving to, and we all want our teachers to, you know, to make more, and they deserve it. But I don't think the general public will understand without the explanation that we have teachers that we pay out of our local funding. They're not paid for by the state. And that's to make sure that we have the adequate amount of teachers per student, you know, that profile. But when that state increase comes in for the other teachers, we have to cover the increase for the teachers that we're paying out of our pocket. And then also in turn, the increases that we have for teacher assistants. When those raises come from the state for the few teacher assistants that are still paid for by the state, the additional ones we have to cover. So every time there's a teacher raise or a teacher assistant raise or whatever, that's more monies that are coming out of our local funds. And so all of those things there, I mean, I've been on the budget committee a lot of years, as a few others have been on it a lot of years. It just keeps compiling and keeps compiling and keeps compiling, and there's not an end to it. And we're at the point we've got to have savings. There's just no way around it.
I'd like to ask just a few questions since we have experts. The budgetary part is very compelling to me, and it's almost pushing us into making hard choices. But I'm still a little curious about the bus thing, and since I do have people in front of me, I can kind of answer. How many kids are riding the bus per day, and what percentage of the student body is that, approximate?
Not to be in front of this, around 1,838 students per day is what buses transport.
And what's the student population?
47, help me here, the last PMR, do you all remember 4778,
What's
something
that?
like that?
Is that number dropping much more rapidly than the student population number? And what would happen, because I think the parents, from what I'm hearing, is more frustrated that those who don't want this, let's just put it that way, they'd like to see how can they, but if more kids wanted to ride the bus, what would be our response? If next year you had 4,000 kids want to ride the bus, what would we have to do as a system? I'm just being crazy, but that's my nature, those who know me.
Well, the school board owns 63 buses, I believe that's right, total, 61, but we have 9 credits. What that means is if we had to put buses back on, the state would have to find us buses to do that, to haul more children. So, I mean, that is an option, we can do that, but by putting those buses back on, the expense will definitely.
So in my crazy idea though, because a lot of the bus routes I'm seeing are very inefficient in the sense that you're not filling the bus, correct?
Correct.
So if you had a lot of kids wanting to ride the bus and we were filling the bus, then we would be running in a much more efficient manner, naturally because of the family's response. I'm just being crazy. Y'all just bear with me for a second. But I think to me, the parents I wish that they kind of understood that. I was one of the ones that took my daughter to school in the car. I never realized till I started seeing this how much I'm contributing to the problem, is what I'm kind of getting at. I was shocked at how much that we're creating long bus routes because you can't pack a bunch of kids from one neighborhood, which is my childhood story, where we loaded the bus up in a 4-mile section of road and off we went to school with a full bus and went to school. And that was my childhood. So I was always mystified. So I was just trying to get a grasp of this. I was a little surprised at the numbers of kids on the bus and what we're having to do. And I understand the long routes, but you're doing that. Like I said, that wasn't a complaint. I'm getting this thing, but I don't know how to turn that trend around, of less and less kids on the bus. And it's just a little worrisome to me. And I'm not trying to create a problem, but the budgetary part is very compelling. I just wish that parents kind of understood a little bit that maybe this could be something that if kids were riding the bus.
Well, approximately, without looking at exact figures, in the last 3 years, we dropped somewhere between 120 to 130 students each year. That's what we have lost. So that's the reason for, parking buses. We have parked 3 buses this year. So we're down to 51 buses. And Ms. Watts might can expand on that a little bit.
When I started, we had so many students riding that we had double runs. We had buses at the elementary school that would go and do a quick drop-off, kind of similar to what you're talking about you grew up with, and then it would come back to the school and it would load the bus again, and then it would go out to the further areas. We have, every year since then, we have reduced just about every year how many buses we are running by running more efficient routes. And when you say they're not efficient, that kind of throws me a little bit, because we're running the routes very efficiently, but when you have students in the rural areas that we have, and you go 3 miles before you get from one house to the other, you're talking about 4 miles and you're to school. We're talking about 4 miles from one student pickup to another, and you only have one student that's there in elementary, and then you have a student that goes to middle school, so we have another bus that goes and gets them, and then they may even have a high school sibling. So it's not that we're not reducing and trying to reduce, but the state, just like with your budgets, it keeps cutting our transportation budget. Our efficiency rating it has always been at least 100% or close to it.
And that wasn't meant to be critical. By efficiency, I'm using the term of empty seats.
Correct.
just that's the only way I'm referring to it, not in any other formula. I've just meant excess capacity.
Exactly.
Sorry, maybe I should
No,
use
that's
that
fine.
word
And
instead.
I understand what you're saying, I just, for me, it's, we're routing and using computer programs to get the closest thing that we can, but we're still taking 3 buses to an address that's at the corner of Wilkes and Iredell County, because we have a family that has all 3 levels, so that is inefficient. And we did do 2 combination routes about, has it been 4 years, where we combined middle and high school.
I think it was 5 or 6 years ago.
We had a situation where we were able to combine our middle and our middle school and our high school runs in that section of the county, the Vashti area, that direction. And believe it or not, we had less discipline issues on those 2 buses than we did on our regular buses. And I'm hopeful that that's by splitting up our middle school and dispersing them and not having the big ratios of all middle school students on 1 bus, that discipline issue will not be an issue. Because I know that was one of the parent concerns.
I got one question, and John, I don't mean to put you on the spot at all. I've just got this, so I'm just trying to, I'm having struggles. A lot of people in my district are struggling with the discipline problem. You know, I've spent some time at West this week trying to get understanding, you know, and the problems that they have with students, more of profanity, language, the stuff 7th and 8th graders are doing. For instance, this year they've had like vaping on the bus, some different issues that most parents that I've talked to are struggling. You know, is my kindergarten and 1st grader going to be subject to that? I can't tell you that bothers me. So I'm having a lot of trouble with this. My question, and I'm not putting you on the spot tonight by no means, if you had more time, like the high school, for example, you got 12 buses at the high school. You know, there's times they're running 13, 16 kids. You've not got anything over 24 to average at the best. If we was saying, hey, we're going to work on savings system-wide, is there any thoughts on cutting a couple routes, buses, at, let's say, the high school, and adding a few kids and maybe a few minutes, I realize, but could we save money in areas like that we have such low numbers? I know Whitburg, for example, last year had 3 buses. Now they have 2, and their average is up to like 44 kids. Is that something that we could do or work on, you think, as an alternative plan that might help us instead of the?
Well, we have looked at that, and if we could do it, we would do it. Our problem is we can't get our buses back in time. Starting at a 6 a.m. pickup time, we don't pick up any students before 6 a.m.
Right.
And doing that and then getting back time drop off before they can have the breakfast and all that, that's why it's like it. We would definitely love to keep them out there longer, pick up them,
Okay.
and maybe park a couple of them.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
But one thing I did want to elaborate on, something that you mentioned, that over the past several nights, I've read, because you can read school board issues throughout the state, and exactly what you said is what's happened in a lot of areas, is that when the numbers of the middle school students are reduced on the buses, then their discipline issues decrease. And so,
Too many hormones in one.
that's right.
Well, I know that's a big concern. I mean, it intuitively is a concern to have 8th graders with kindergartners, but I think that's something we can look at going forward as far as monitors. It is hard enough for us to get bus drivers. It's a statewide problem, not just an Alexander County problem. It's a very difficult job to do. I can't imagine it would be any easier to get monitors, but years and years ago, when I was in elementary school, I was what's called a JPO, which is a junior police officer. And we got to do the crossing stop signs for the crosswalk. It was a highly prized position. You had to be selected. You had to be one of those kids that didn't have disciplinary issues. We got to wear the yellow vest and the little helmet. I know this is a hilarious picture in your mind, but on that, there may be something that we can do along those lines. And I hate to say it like this, but it's a great resume building for kids that are responsible, mature. They would go through some kind of this, and this is just a suggestion, selection process that they could be the bus monitor. And that comes with a lot of responsibility, but also, you know, a great big benefit for kids as they move from middle school into high school and are looking to apply for jobs or colleges or internships, to be selected for something like that. So that's just a thought that we could consider, because it is a concern. But I will say that my daughter rode the bus as a kindergartner for 3 weeks. We had just as much problems with 4th and 5th graders, probably more so with the younger kids because they were less mature. That's just my own personal experience. So having been on the board since 2008, when we started this huge financial, the financial concerns, the board even back then has done everything we can to keep people employed, because my philosophy personally and the philosophy of the board is that people in our classrooms with our kids are the most valuable thing that we can have. Safety is important, yes. Transportation is important and mandated. But I think that we can be creative enough as a community that if the board decides to do a consolidated route process, that we can make it work and we can tweak it as we start the process and as we get feedback from folks, and we can address the problems hopefully that come up. And if it doesn't work in the long run, we're going to have to come up with a different idea. But I did want to throw out the student monitors. If we had student bus drivers, which I would not support, I think we can have student monitors selected carefully.
And that was one of the questions. Can a responsible 8th grade student help monitor? I don't see why in the world that couldn't be done.
Junior Beta Club members that need to get their hours in and are good kids that would be supportive of that environment, I think would be a great help to our student body. And for some of the comments that we received that said that we should probably think that our motto is money first. Our motto is children first. It always has been. And we are trying the best we can to take what we've been given and use it for the benefit of our children. Is it my first choice to consolidate bus routes? No, in a perfect world if we had full funding, but it's certainly not my choice. I would rather consolidate bus routes than have to send teaching assistants home. So that's just my opinion. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Any other board members have any comments? Okay. Well, I think the question at hand is, the matter of consolidating bus routes. And at this time, I'll open the floor for a motion regarding this. And that's the next plausible step. But and I think everybody's covered the fact pretty well that some move that we make, we will have to make a move to save money at some point. And it's going to be sooner than later, so it's the board's pleasure.
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second regarding consolidating bus routes. Any further discussion from the board? Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries with Sellers, Shrum, Brixey, Odom, Cooksey in the affirmative.
Yes.
And Mr. Bowman is a no vote. So the motion carries. Okay, at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we stand adjourned.